But now the little one had become exhausted, and she seemed ready to collapse with the physical effort and the excitement. The tetrarchess was about to rise from her place when Herod, heavy-limbed and half-drunk as he was, sprang to his feet, lifted up the child, and carried her to his couch, where he held her in his lap. And now, little Salome, you can ask the Tetrarch of Galilee for whatever your heart desires, and in the words of King Ahasuerus to Esther, when she found favor in his eyes, you shall have it, though it be half my kingdom. And little Salome, fondling the face of the Tetrarch, answered, I want the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea to have his faithful Germans bring me, on a silver platter, the head of Yochanan. We heard the words clearly, and yet we did not understand them. We had listened intently, absorbed in this second part of the game between the Tetrarch and the child, and it seemed to us that the words could not have been spoken. And it seemed also that the Tetrarch did not believe his own ears, for he asked in a puzzled voice, Whose head do you want my faithful Germans to bring you on a silver platter? The head of Yochanan the Baptist, the prophet whom you keep imprisoned in the cellar of the fortress. The head of the mad prophet, stammered Herod, turning white. What fantastic idea is this? What do you want with the head of a man? We sat rigid with astonishment. Only the Tetrarchus observed mildly, Where can the child have learned such odd things? It must be her early upbringing in the desert. What? Asked little Salome, seated in the Tetrarch's lap and still fondling his face. Are you, the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, really afraid of him because he is a prophet? The Tetrarch threw a furious glance, like that of an enraged Zeus, first at the child's mother, and then at his secretary, Theophilus, who looked down innocently. From them he turned his gaze on me, and proudly, almost insolently, he replied, not to the child, but to the assembled guests, The Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea is afraid of no one, no, not even of— He was about to utter something frightful, for his face turned a shade paler, but at the last moment he bethought himself and ended up lamely, Not even of the king of Arabia, who threatens me with war because I thrust out his daughter in favor of my brother's wife. And now he fixed his eyes again on Herodias. Oh, but you're afraid of him, the child cried, pointing downward. I have told you that I am afraid of no one, except, of course, the Caesar, who has been my lifelong friend. With this he turned his eyes back to me, as if to threaten me. Then why won't you give me his head? Because a man's head is not a toy for a child, the Tetrarch answered, his baffled gaze seeking the mother once again, in warning that he knew well what was afoot. But you promised me that you would fulfill my every wish. Aren't you going to keep your word now, Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea? In vain the Tetrarch sought help in our faces. We avoided his eyes. He understood. Yes, you are right, little Salome. The Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea is the slave of his word, like every monarch, like the Caesar in Rome. Go, carry out her wish, he cried to the German guards at the further end of the terrace. Tense silence followed. We heard the footsteps of the guard descending the steps. The Tetrarch set Salome down, lifted his beaker to an attendant, who filled it and cried, For the peace of Rome and its Caesar. We repeated the toast. He was calm now. It was as though he had stilled his inner terror by invoking the aid of the emperor. In a little while we heard ascending footsteps, and 2 German soldiers entered, carrying on a silver platter the head of a man. It was the head I looked upon in life that afternoon, the same muscular face, turned now from deep sun and desert-tanned brown to ashy blue. The soldiers had set on the severed head the phylactery, the ritualistic leather box. The eyes were open, the lips too. We were almost prepared to hear a voice issue from them. As the soldiers offered the head to little Salome, who stretched forth her hands, the phylactery slipped forward and tumbled into the blood which filled the platter. The eyes suddenly closed, the lips too. From outside, from the court below, rose a sound of wailing mixed with curses. I was amazed that at this late hour there should be still strangers in the citadel. We pretended not to hear. We tried, at least round the table of the Tetrarchus, to resume the conversation as if nothing had happened. But I looked at the Tetrarch, and I perceived that the momentary reassurance evoked by the mention of the Caesar had fled, and his face was pallid with terror. The effect of the wine had left him. He did his best to conceal his torment from us. He spoke loudly, he jested, but no longer with little Salome, whom he had pushed away with a look of loathing. He commanded the soldiers to remove the bloody platter with the severed head. Little Salome protested. The head belonged to her. The Tetrarch glanced angrily at his wife, who caught up the child and pacified her. To us she said again, apologetically, "Really, these wild ideas must have been planted in her head at the barbarous court of her father. Who ever heard of such a thing? A child wanting to play with the severed head of a man?" Herod labored to continue the banquet. He ordered the slaves to fill the beakers of the guests. He drank again and again to the empire and to his friendship with the Caesar. It was a sorry performance. He could not even drown his terror in wine. The wailing did not cease to mount from the court below. "Those are the followers and pupils of Yochanan," said Ptolemaeus superfluously. "Why don't you drive them out?" "He would not want us to," and he indicated the Tetrarch. After a time, the lamenting ceased of itself. A suspicious stillness followed. Then a single voice was lifted up. It pealed out with the disquieting sound of one of their ram's horns. The clear, ringing sound cut through the air, and we heard every syllable distinctly. It was a verse from one of their sacred books, which they applied now to their decapitated prophet. The words had a shattering effect on the Tetrarch, and even the Tetrarchus seemed to be shaken out of her habitual calm and well-bred self-control. "A voice cries in the wilderness, 'Prepare a path.'" "Have them driven out," said Herodias to the Tetrarch. "They are disturbing the banquet." "Whom shall I have driven out? It is a voice crying from the wilderness. How shall I silence it?" The Tetrarch rose hastily, and without a glance even at his Roman guests, fled from the banquet. The Tetrarchess, herself again, made an effort to erase from our minds the painful impression created by her husband. She said to the table, "What is the difference after all? The rebel has been punished. The law has been satisfied. Rome may now be content." "I shall not fail to tell the proconsul," I returned. "Your little daughter has deserved well of Rome."